Delectable Encounters, Art, Food, and the Day of the Dead. We begin with three, I think, very astute observations by three very different people. The first is by Carlos Pellicer, a highly respected Mexican poet, who said, "The Mexican people have two obsessions, a taste for death and a delight in flowers." And then Magda Bogin, the award-winning translator and author, "The Day of the Dead turns Christian piety on its head with a combination of irreverence and mysticism." And Betsy Romero, who is an internationally famous contemporary Mexican artist, who says, "Our Day of the Dead is an affirmation of life." The Day of the Dead is a celebration unique to Mexico. At once a national homage to the presence of the dead among the living and a colorful tribute to the country's dual indigenous and Spanish heritage. It's the fiesta that perhaps more than any other embodies the heart of the Mexican character and culture. And because food is such an integral part of Dia de los Muertos, it seems appropriate to begin this talk with a vibrant, colorful depiction of angels preparing to eat. And this is by Rodolfo Morales, one of Oaxaca's most famous artists. He died in 2001 and was very much an artist of the country's indigenous peoples, especially its women. According to Morales, Mexico would be lost without the steadfast work of women. His paintings with their folkloric themes and dreamlike images in rich colors invariably feature scenes from his childhood in Ocotlan in the state of Oaxaca. Always with women dominating the canvases, there is rarely, if ever, a man in sight. And in this case, what we have are angels, and I'll be coming back to angels a little bit later. So death held a significant place in the pantheons and rituals of Mexico's ancient civilizations. Among the Aztecs, for example, it was considered a blessing to die in childbirth or battle or as a human sacrifice, for these assured the victim a desirable destination in the afterlife. Now, this is what is called a zompantli, which is the Aztec skull's rack. And zompantli is a Nahuatl word, and Nahuatl is the language of the Aztecs, and it's a language that is still spoken in Tepoztlan. For the Aztecs, these skulls were the seeds that would ensure the continued existence of humanity. They were a sign of life and regeneration, like the first flowers of spring. But Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors, who marched into Tenochtitlan, that's the present-day Mexico City, when they marched in 1519, they saw these skulls very differently. For then they saw the entire practice of human sacrifice, believing that the Aztecs were barbaric, and so Hernán Cortés, they felt justified in destroying Tenochtitlan in 1521. With Hernán Cortés's arrival, the imposition of the Catholic religion began. This led to a phenomenon of syncretism, in which Christian saints and pre-Hispanic gods overlapped to create rites with unique and distinctive features. Death was converted into a source of hope. The Day of the Dead celebrations are a synthesis of Catholic and European beliefs with pre-Hispanic rites and beliefs. Now we have Cuatlaque. Cuatlaque is a Nahuatl word meaning the one with the skirt of serpents. She was a major deity within the Aztec pantheon. Viewed as a Mother Earth goddess, she was the goddess of agriculture, childbirth, fertility, life, and death. She was what is called a psychopomp. That is, she guided souls to the place of the dead. And her double-headed serpent belt, which you can see here, I think I'm pointing in the right way. So the skull is at the front, and it's also at the back, and the rest of the belt is double serpents. So after the Spanish conquest, this monumental sculpture was buried because it was considered a pagan idol by the Spanish Christian invaders. After languishing in obscurity for more than 200 years, it was found in 1790, and then shortly afterwards it was reburied because it was considered to be still too pagan and too frightening. So it was finally dug up again in the mid-19th century, and now you can see it in the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. And it's over 8 feet tall, and it's very, very imposing. It's considered to be one of the most important Aztec sculptures. And she's leaning forwards, so she's very intimidating for onlookers who are looking at her. Now, this may be an image that is familiar to you. This is by José Guadalupe Posada, who was born in 1852 and died in 1913. La Calavera Catrina is considered one of the most important cultural icons in Mexican art. Posada helped popularize the calavera as a satirical graphic motif. He often printed it with rhyming ballads or corridos. He created illustrated broadsides, brimming with biting political humor, frequently targeting political figures and historical figures. The vivid visual content ensured that the message could reach the Mexican masses, even those who were illiterate. So La Calavera Catrina is a satire of a female dandy, and she was originally known as La Garbancera, the chickpea vendor, and this was a reference to ordinary women who put on airs and tried to be more refined. Catrina is the iconic modern Mexican image of death. She speaks to the conflict between rich and poor and the fact that at the end we're all equal. Though it's an image of death, Catrina always seems to be smiling. In death, she embraces life. And that's really what the Day of the Dead is all about. And this is what has been said about her. Her face is unforgettable, and she goes by many names: La Catrina, La Flaca, La Huesuda, La Pelona. Fancy lady, skinny, bony, baldy. A fixture in Mexican society, she's not some trendy fashion model, but La Muerte, death. In 1946, Diego Rivera accepted a new commission, and this was to do a mural for a restaurant in the Art Deco Hotel Del Prado in Mexico City. By this point, Rivera had become a much-loved godfather of Mexico's artistic and political worlds, a folk hero of sorts who represented the socialist ideals of Mexico in the mid-20th century. When the hotel was destroyed in the 1985 Mexico City earthquake, the mural was restored and moved to its own museum. So this is Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Alameda Park. And what you're seeing here is just a detail of it. It's the central section because it's over 15 meters long and over 4.5 meters high. And it's now in Alameda Park in its own museum. So here we have Diego Rivera as a little boy, and Frida Kahlo has got her arm on his shoulder. In her other hand, she's holding a yin and yang disc. And this is because this is a reference to the very complex relationship that she and Diego Rivera had. That he was her mentor, they then married, they separated, they got back together again. They painted each other frequently, and they were both political comrades. And so Diego Rivera's other hand is being held by La Calavera Catrina, and she in turn has got her arm looped through Guadalupe Posada, José Guadalupe Posada. And up here, it's a little difficult for me to see, but there is a nun over here, and I want you to remember the nun because I'll be coming back to her. So Diego Rivera believe that all art is propaganda, and the only difference is the kind of propaganda. He saw the mural as a democratic expression, saying, since art is essential for human life, it can't just belong to the few. Art is the universal language, and it belongs to all mankind. Inspired by Dream of a Sunday Afternoon, we have Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Alameda Park by the Don Linares family. Dia de los Muertos is the liveliest time of the year for papier-mâché makers, known as cartoneros. The Linares family are famous for their papier-mâché figures, and all participated in making figures representing some of those found in Diego Rivera's mural. And they are life-size. I particularly love the Katrina Calavera. Now, a really important part of Dia de los Muertos is family. And Cristina Tacconi, a respected art historian in Mexico, wrote this: there's an unbreakable emotional family bond behind the Day of the Dead. Unlike other holidays in Mexico, the Day of the Dead commands complete commitment and participation for the entire family. If possible, everyone comes home, pitches in, cooks, cleans, eats too much, sees old friends, and tells stories. So on the left, we have The Family by Rufino Tamayo. He was from Oaxaca, born in 1899 of Zapotec Indian parents, and he was orphaned at 12 and sent to live in Mexico City. La Familia was painted 4 years before his death in 1991, and it's widely considered as one of the artist's most accomplished compositions from the last decade of his 60-year career. In an interview conducted the same year as he painted La Familia, Tamayo spoke about the importance of family life and the affection that he had never himself enjoyed as a child. He and his wife Olga were unable to have children, and it's believed that Tamayo viewed his own paintings as his offspring, each made with loving dedication. He conceived life and art as a universal heartbeat and believed that Mexico is a country of tragic happiness. On the right, we have Torito 3, The Family, by Carlo Magno Pedro Martinez. He is also a Zapotec from the state of Oaxaca. He learned his craft from his mother, an artisan, and his father, a sculptor. His father taught him that he must never be angry when he was creating a piece with clay, because that anger would be transferred to the piece. The Zapotec people have been working with black clay for more than 2,500 years. Most of Martinez's work is inspired by traditional Oaxacan characters and imagery, and his most recurring theme is death. Although many of his works feature skeletal figures, they're not mere Day of the Dead decorations. They're expressions of how he sees the world. In addition, so the family is hugely important, and of course, food. So another quote by, and this one is by the late, great Mexican chef Patricia Quintana. And it epitomizes the role of food in Mexico, especially during El Dia de los Muertos. Since pre-Hispanic times, food has been a ritual, she wrote. Through food, you find ways to celebrate. After a lifetime of feasts celebrated with family and friends of all ages, it seems appropriate that the spirit would return yearly to those it knew and loved, to partake once more of the pleasures of the earth. The last and forever recurring feast of Mexico bridges life and death, feeding both body and soul. So this painting, La Cocina, painted in 1865 by Agustin Arrieta, is a kitchen in Puebla. He was known as a costumbrista artist, because he depicted people, places, customs, and home life of the time. His paintings are a window into the Puebla gastronomic world of the 19th century. Puebla is the city where he was born and where he grew up and lived. And one reason I included this painting is to point out these clay dishes on the wall, because every year at this time, I would say in all markets in Mexico, you're going to find stalls where these clay dishes, these barro casserole dishes, are being sold, because an important element of any ofrenda is the food for the departed, and it's believed that new dishes were a sign of hope and a representation for a new life. The other thing I want to point out is this woman kneeling here, and she is using what's called a metate. A metate is made of volcanic stone, as is the rolling pin, and what she's doing is grinding the corn to make tortillas. I think this is wonderful because this is an ex voto, and an ex voto is a type of votive painting giving thanks for a miracle. Ex votos or retablos were usually painted on tin, and they can be difficult to date precisely. In this one, we see San Pascual Bailon up here. He was the patron saint. He's the patron saint of cooks and kitchens, and he's absolutely my favorite saint. And I do have a number of San Pascual Bailons above the stove in the kitchen in Tepoztlan. Now, he was a 16th century Spanish Franciscan monk, and he worked in the monastery kitchens. And he would summon the angels to help him with his kitchen chores, and that gave him time to pray. So here we have the cook, and she is thanking San Pascual because after her patron, her boss, had tasted her mole, he asked her to marry him. He was so impressed with her wonderful mole that he fell head over heels in love with her. So what I love about this is that here is this 16th century Spanish Franciscan monk who never stepped foot in Mexico being thanked for a mole prepared in Puebla in 1927. And this brings us to mole. People associate this dish with either the Baroque city of Puebla, and to give it its full name, it's Puebla de Los Angeles, or mole is also associated with the state of Oaxaca, but its origin is still disputed. One legend is that in the late 16th century, the nuns at the Santa Rosa convent in Puebla de Los Angeles panicked because the archbishop was coming for dinner and they had no food to offer him. So they started praying desperately, and an angel, remember the angels from the Rodolfo Morales painting, an angel came to inspire them. So they began chopping and grinding and roasting, mixing different types of chilies together with spices, day-old bread, and so a little chocolate and approximately 20 other ingredients. It's known that mole was enriched during the time of the Spanish viceroys with almonds, egg bread, sesame seeds, hazelnuts, and spices. In the words of Jack Turner, the author of Spice, History of a Temptation, it's as though the tastes of Moctezuma and the Catholic kings meet on the plate. And a personal experience with mole is when our older son got married in Tepoztlan in 2014. A Mexican friend and I spent 3 days preparing a mole de zarzamora, a blackberry mole that took us 3 days to prepare. And it was for close to 100 people. We had so many chilies and so many nuts that her suggestion was that she take it to the local mill where people took their corn to be ground to make tortillas, because there was no way that we could grind the chilies and the nuts and the spices sufficiently that they would be fine enough. And mole is very much a communal. It's a very, very important dish, not just for the Day of the Dead, but for special occasions. And People will have their own recipe, the family recipe that is passed down for generations. On the left, we have a mole poblano with sesame seeds, and not all moles contain chocolate, but mole poblano from Puebla does. And on the right, we have pan de muerto. And I do have a story to tell because I found a Mexican bakery in Kensington Market, and yesterday went and was very happy to find that they had a pan de muerto, a loaf of Day of the Dead bread, because it's still a little bit early for it to be available. And it is sitting in our apartment in Toronto rather than on the ofrenda, so I do apologize. So there are 400 variations of pan de muerto. And one of the most common, or the one that I'm most familiar with from central Mexico, is laced with anise, orange blossom water, and orange peel. And the round shape of pan de muerto represents the never-ending cycle of life and death. And whilst we're still on mole, here we have Homage to Mole by Alfonso Castillo Horta. He was known for his exquisitely detailed tree of life sculptures. And here you see a fitting tribute to mole. And here, it's in fact two different trees of life. Here we have a nun, and scattered around are the ingredients and the spices that are used in a mole. And here is a different nun from a different tree of life, but you can see some of the chilies, and they are absolutely exquisite. So if you're in Mexico City, these are in the permanent collection of the Museum of Popular Art, which is one of my favorite museums to visit. Now, we seem to be talking about nuns quite a lot, so here is absolutely my favorite nun. And this is Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. She was a brilliant writer, philosopher, poet, dramatist, composer, cook, in addition to being a nun. She was known as the Mexican Phoenix and the 10th Muse. She was born in 1648 and very deliberately chose to spend most of her life in the Hieronymite convent in Mexico City. She was a fierce critic of the misogynist and retrograde views of high-profile religious men, and she confronted them directly through letters and published essays. But Sor Juana was eventually censored and forced to sell her considerable library. She retaliated by publishing a long letter to her detractors, but she addressed it ostensibly to another nun. And in the letter, she used all sorts of cooking metaphors to mock and defy the status quo. What could I tell you, my lady, of the secrets of nature that I have discovered while cooking? I observed that an egg unifies and fries in butter or oil, but to the contrary, dissolves in syrup, that in order to keep sugar liquid, it suffices to throw on it a little, very little bit of water flavored with quince or another bitter fruit, that the yolk and white of the same egg, when separated and combined with sugar, have an opposite effect, and one different from when they are both used together. I only refer to these things to show my nature, that one can well philosophize and prepare dinner. As I often say on observing these little things, if Aristotle had cooked more, he would have written so much more. And on the right, we have an ofrenda, homage to Sor Juana and the Hieronymite nuns. And this is in the University of the Cloister of Sor Juana in Mexico City. It's a private university in the historic center. And I think that this is quite a wonderful ofrenda. And here we have a completely different nun. And this is Nun with Hot Chocolate. She is positively coquettish with her rouged cheeks and her rosebud mouth. And her presence on the 1945 of the Moreno Chocolate Company is a clear reference to Sor Juana. Chocolate in Mexico was a psychotropic substance, so potent that it was reserved for priests and god kings only. It was taken from its Aztec ceremonial use and retained by the Spanish as a tasty beverage and as a medicine. And some of the medicinal complaints treated with chocolate have included anemia, poor appetite, mental fatigue, poor breast milk production, fever, gout, kidney stones, reduced longevity, poor sexual appetite, and low virility. When Money Grew on Trees is the intriguing title of anthropologist René Millon's 1955 PhD thesis on cocoa beans in Mesoamerica. The Spaniards had first learned from the Maya of Yucatan that cocoa beans were the coin of the realm, as well as a source of food and drink. So a turkey hen, a good turkey hen, cost 100 beans, 100 full beans, or 120 drunken beans. A good gobbler, that is a male turkey, cost 200. A freshly picked avocado was worth 3 beans, and when fully ripe, only 1. Cocoa beans were so valuable as currency that people began to produce counterfeit ones to pass as currency. And we move from chocolate to corn, another important element. And on the ofrenda, there are blue corn tortillas, so if you never need to buy them, there is a store in in Kensington Market, which sells them. So this is by Diego Rivera, and he depicted the daily life, work, celebrations, and rituals of indigenous and mestizo people. And this iconic image of a woman using a metate to grind corn to make tortillas is one of the best known of Rivera's classical style of painting of Mexican subjects. And what I really like is the way in which she absolutely dominates the entire canvas. Here we have the metate, and here we have a comal, a griddle, made out of clay. And I can still buy this kind of comal in the Tepoztlan market, as well as this brazier. And this extraordinary photograph, Making Tortillas in Tepoztlan, 1907, taken by Sumner Matheson, an American photographer who spent 10 months traveling around Mexico photographing fiestas, churches, and ruins. And it's one of my favorite images because there's a timelessness to the actions in making tortillas. Whether it's this young Tepoztecan woman in 1907 or a woman in today's market in Tepoztlan in 2024. And what it is, here, she's holding it between her hands, and you think that it would be very easy, but here she's doing this. She hasn't got a tortilla press, doing this, and she will then, literally like a ballet movement, she'll lay it on the comal and produce absolutely perfect tortillas. Bernardo de Sahagún, Friar Bernardino de Sahagún, arrived in New Spain, Mexico, in 1529, and he's considered the father of ethnography. And here's what he wrote about women making tortillas. A woman who can cook well has to know how to do the following. She must be diligent and hardworking. She must know how to make her tortillas flat and round and well formed, or make them long or thin, or with folds, or roll them up with chili sauce. She must know how to put mashed beans in tamal masa and make meat tamales. A woman who is good at her duties knows how to taste her cooking, is clever and clean at her work, and makes fine and tasty dishes. A woman who is not good at her duties is tiresome and annoying, for she is dirty, swinish, greedy, and sweet-toothed, and cooks tortillas badly. Her dishes are burnt, or salty, or sour, and she is completely vulgar and coarse. That's very damning. So one hopes that this is not the woman who was making tortillas at this lunch, this very elegant lunch, which was for 10 women in a very upscale neighborhood in Mexico City. And notice these 10 women needed 3 waiters to serve them. And the reason I included it is because the table is set with skeletons for the Day of the Dead. Mexico's population is 130 million, but the distribution of wealth is skewed to the ultra-rich. A July 2024 statistic reports that 10% of the population claims approximately 79% of the wealth. The imbalance is striking, and the disparity impacts all aspects of Mexico, including healthcare, which is why Tepos Rosa is so important. And on the right, we have basura, rubbish. Because after any good meal, there's bound to be garbage, and it's fitting, and I think really only in Mexico, that a Mexico City garbage truck would be decorated with skulls, guaranteed to remind passers-by and motorists about what time of the year it is. So now we move on to ofrendas. On the Day of the Dead throughout Mexico, photographs of honored dead are placed upon the home altar. They're further enhanced by proximity to holy pictures of popular religious figures, such as the Virgin of Guadalupe, the Holy Trinity, or Jesus Christ. And in addition to family photographs of departed family members and favorite foods and beverages of the departed, the ofrenda must include several essential elements. Water, the source of life, is offered to souls to quench their thirst after their long journey and also to strengthen their return. Salt, the element of purification. It serves to prevent the body from being corrupted on its journey to and fro. Candles and votive candles. The flames they produce mean light, faith, and hope, and they are there to guide and illuminate their arrival and their return. An incense from the dried sap of the copal tree is used to cleanse the place of evil spirits so that the soul can enter its home without any danger. And flowers. Flowers are a symbol of the festivity. They decorate and scent the place during the stay of the souls. And all of these, I wish they were real, but all of these marigolds, marigold in Nahuatl is cempasúchil. And Maite, a young woman we know in Tepoztlan, she made all of these cempasúchil flowers from crepe paper and carefully packed them in boxes so that I could bring them up here. The other flower that you can see in abundance is the coxcomb. And the coxcomb flower is very much a flower of the Day of the Dead. And Doug and I are very fortunate that we have good friends who happen to have an enormous flower bed that is full of these flowers. So when we were at their home outside Paris, Ontario, on Monday morning, the husband, also called Doug, very kindly picked a huge number of the coxcomb flowers for me. So here we have 2 very different ofrendas. On the left, from a very humble ofrenda from Oaxaca. But here we have the religious image, and peeking behind here are the photographs of the departed. But we have the marigolds, and on the floor you can see the beverage of choice is some kind of Coca-Cola. Whether it's Coca-Cola or an imitation, I'm not sure. And on the right, an ofrenda from Veracruz. Here you can see the banks of marigolds and the coxcomb flowers, the religious, we've got the Virgin of Guadalupe at the top, and also at the bottom here is the family member. So this is a much more elaborate one. And let's look at two paintings of ofrendas. Altar de Muertos by Maria Izquierdo. Maria Izquierdo was born in 1902 and died in 1955 after suffering a second stroke. In her work, she always paid homage to the popular and artisan traditions of Mexico, especially rural Mexico. And this is what she said about her work. I strive to make my paintings reflect the authentic Mexico that I feel and love. I avoid anecdotal, folkloric, and political themes because they have neither visual nor poetic power, and I think that in the world of painting, a picture is an open window on the human imagination. Now, in her Day of the Dead, we have the skull, we have the papel picado, the paper cutouts that you can see here. Here is the Day of the Dead bread and the marigolds. And this is the incense burner. I have one exactly like it that I will be bringing out when we return to Mexico in time for the Day of the Dead. Maria Izquierdo was the first Mexican woman to have her work exhibited in the US, and this was in 1930. She was one of Diego Rivera's star pupils, and in 1945, she was the first woman to be given a major governmental commission to paint a mural. But because of Diego Rivera's and other muralist painters' objections, the commission was revoked because the men felt that she lacked the necessary experience for such a high-profile project. On the right, we have Altar de Muertos, a detail by Elena Clement. For me, Elena Clement's paintings are always meticulously observed observations of daily life. And this Day of the Dead altar is typical of what is found in the Huasteca region of Mexico. That's in northeast Mexico. And the arch that you can see is very much significant for that part of the country. So Elena Clement, here we have photographs of her family members, including family members of her former husband. We have the candles, and we have the Coca-Cola and the marigolds. And then we have this. So whilst I was preparing this talk, and I was talking about it, and Doug my husband Doug asked me what this was. We then had several very brisk exchanges. Because he said that these are stockings, that this is a skirt, and so he thought this was a doll. I, however, had another idea. I thought it was Jesus Christ on the cross. So, thanks to a good friend who is a very good friend of Elena Clement's, I contacted her, and the message came back, and I hate to boast, Doug, but I was right. It is Jesus Christ, and if you look in the background, there is the cross, and you can see his hand, that you can see the nail through. I would have done a poll asking whose side you were on, but I do understand why he thought that it could be a doll, although one wonders what a doll was doing on an ofrenda. And a really wonderful ofrenda. This is by Jose Reyes Mesa, who died in 2011, aged 77. He wrote that for him, he was born with three things. Painting, three things that he loved. Painting, bullfighting, and cooking. But it was painting that dominated his life. And his Dia de Muertos ofrenda is vibrant, energetic, full of color and life. And the ofrenda with its jostling plates of fruit and bounty of choice dishes. So here we have the chicken with the mole. Here we've got some tamales in banana husks, another tamal here, and the sugar skulls, the bank of marigolds, and also sunflower seeds. Oh, and in the corner, the conchas, a very popular sweet bread in Mexico. And if I can just compliment Miriam, who last November, for an event, a fundraiser for Tepotzrosa that was held in Toronto last November, Miriam and her friends and family made 150 of these, which I think was hugely impressive. It's certainly something I couldn't have done. And the sugar skulls. But let's first look at the Skull Factory by Manuel Alvarez Bravo. His work is very often associated with surrealism, but he was never a member of the movement. He photographed in the countryside and the villages, portraying a continual interweaving of people, their work, and religion. And often there is the presence of death throughout his work, and his preoccupation with light and shade in his pictures is also linked to life and death. Alvarez Bravo believed that before the conquest, all art was of the people, and popular art has never ceased to exist in Mexico, and that is a sentiment I heartily agree with. On the right, we have this exquisite sugar skull. Now, the origin of the sugar skull, the small sugar skulls, is something of a mystery. Early references have them being sold for the Day of the Dead during the mid-18th century, while some records date them as far back as the pre-Hispanic period. Some people suggest that their origin may date from the merger of pre-Hispanic Mexicans and Spanish Catholics. And we move on to cemeteries. From mid-October through the first week of November, markets and stores all over Mexico are replete with all of the special things that are needed for Dia de los Muertos. These include skeletons, papel picado that you can see on the floor here, elaborately decorated wreaths and crosses, candles and votive lights, marigolds, the cempasúchil, and the velvety red cockscomb flowers. So here on the left, we have a cemetery from Chiapas, and this is a very different type of cemetery for me. And on the right, one from Puebla with these banks of marigold flowers. And this from the cemetery in Tepoztlan, taken by Salvador Espinosa in 2018. And in the background, you can see the mountains. So this cemetery is a 10-minute walk from where we live. And one of the things I like is that this tomb looks as though it's been tiled very efficiently with bathroom tiles. But look at the display of marigolds and look at this beautiful cross. Now in Tepoztlan, it is not only the 1st and the 2nd of November, but also 8 days later that there is a vigil in the cemetery where people go to gather with food and with candles, and that they stay all night. In Tepoztlan, they stay for a longer period of time, which I think they're very fortunate. And this is not only in Tepoztlan, it's in 2 other towns in the state of Morelos, which is where Tepoztlan is located. Music is a big part of any cemetery, whether it's the saxophonist, as you have here, whether it's a mariachi or a brass band. So it is an extraordinary and very moving time of the year, and it's a time of the year I have a huge amount of respect for, and I feel very fortunate to live in a country which honors its dead and makes me feel more connected, certainly with my parents. Because they appear every day, not every day, on the ofrenda each year. A small painting on tin by Frida Kahlo, Girl with Death Mask, or She Plays Alone. This small painting on tin is thought to be a self-portrait of herself aged 4. She's holding a cempasúchil flower, a marigold, and her mask strongly resembles a skull. The tiger mask at her foot references one that she had in her home, and here it's used as a talisman to protect the child against evil. Frida Kahlo was known to Diego Rivera as La Gran Ocultadora, the great concealer, because throughout her work there is a constant oscillation between masking and unmasking, self-concealment and self-exposure. After her death in 1954, Frida Kahlo was known and respected within artistic communities in Mexico and abroad, but it was in the context of her relationship with Diego Rivera. And in the decades following her death, Frida Kahlo's artwork grew in popularity, and in the 1970s, her work and story gained greater attention, coincided with the growing feminist movement and the international interest in Mexican arts and cultures. In 1978, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago held Kahlo's first major retrospective in the US. And on the right, The Day of the Dead by John Bellany. This is a foreigner's reaction to Mexico's Day of the Dead. The Scottish artist John Bellany made his first visit to Mexico in 1996. He came at the invitation of an Anglo-Mexican businessman who was already an enthusiastic collector of John Bellany's work, because Mr. Amparo wanted Bellany to experience Mexico's Day of the Dead celebrations firsthand. He provided John Bellany and his wife with a house and a driver for 3 months. They arrived in Mexico City on October the 31st, and for the next few days, they were driven around Michoacan and Oaxaca, and this is what John Bellany said about the experience in an interview. There was that mixture of piety and joie de vivre. It was like the whole of life had been rolled into the 3 days. That set the tone. I just couldn't put the paintbrush down when we got back to our house. It was opening my eyes to color, and I was intoxicated by it. I was in a state of wonder. This was a complete contrast to Bellany's own upbringing in Port Seton, which is a small fishing village in Scotland, where fishing, boat building, and religion were the cornerstones of the community. And the bleak Calvinist doctrine preaching hell, fire, and damnation was ever present. Viva la Vida by Frida Kahlo. Watermelons symbolize life and love, abundance and fertility, and are often used in Dia de los Muertos imagery, celebration imagery, and altar offerings. Viva la Vida was Frida Kahlo's last painting, completed just 8 days before she died. And despite her deteriorating health, the title of this work seems to be a tribute to life. She inscribed Viva la Vida, long live life. Now, this may have been a straightforward statement as she neared death, but it may also have been an ironic commentary on her pain-filled life. Due to polio, she contracted age 6, a crippling bus accident when she was 18, and multiple surgeries throughout her life. Viva la Vida remained relatively unknown for a number of years after her death, but then the painting began its journey to becoming an iconic masterpiece. In 1953, Frida Kahlo received her first solo exhibition at a gallery in Mexico City, and she wrote the invitation like a love letter. With friendship and love born from the heart, I have the pleasure of inviting you to my humble exhibition. The last words in her diary were, I hope the leaving is joyful, and I hope never to return. She died on July 13th, 1954, at her home, Casa Azul, in Coyoacán, Mexico City. In 2001, one of her self-portraits appeared on a US postage stamp. Diego Rivera died in 1957, 3 years later. His last painting was also of watermelons. Nopalitos. The appeal of El Día de los Muertos extends beyond Mexico. The title of this dance piece, performed at Sadler's Wells in London in 2006, refers to the edible pads of the prickly pear cactus. And the Venezuelan-born choreographer, Javier de Frutas, was aware of the nopal and its extensive use in Mexican cooking. And he said that for him, the nopal was something incredibly exotic. And I did buy nopal cactus in Kensington Market yesterday, and there is a paddle, one that has not been cooked, on the table, and then cubed ones that I did cook. So de Frutas said that he was inspired to do he was inspired by El Día de los Muertos for this dance piece, and also lucha libres, the Mexican wrestlers. So here we have inside a pavilion decorated with lover's portrait and a pair of capering skeletons. And this is what a critic said: Javier de Frutas unveiled a hallucinatory magic lantern show of Mexican culture. The sonorous accompaniment of singer Lila Downs' music turned this piece into a fantasy, beautifully weird and unpredictably wild. I wish I'd been able to see it. So the Day of the Dead has become big business. This appeared in the Hola, Hello magazine in Mexico in 2009. It was the Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week, and as you can see, the models' dresses are all with the imagery of the Day of the Dead. So it's become very big business, not just in Mexico, but elsewhere. And according to many, and I quote, "It's been appropriated by Hollywood and exploited by marketeers so greedily that its essence has been stretched beyond recognition." In the opening sequence of the James Bond 2015 Spectre movie, a cosmopolitan procession of skeletons and Katrinas paraded to the beat of drums was an unprecedented spectacle in Mexico City. Since then, it's been recreated annually by popular demand. And in 2019, there were 2.6 million participants in the 4th International Day of the Dead parade. So if you think back to the promo for this talk that many of you received, that those photographs of people with the painted faces as Katrina or as Frida Kahlo, that this is a relatively new phenomenon. And the Day of the Dead sells. Even Barbie has got in on the act, because the doll has been dressed for the Day of the Dead every year since 2019. In 2022, Mattel produced a Barbie costumed in a black charro outfit. That's the wonderful Mexican cowgirl outfit. And her face was made up as Katrina. Priced at $100, the limited production of 20,000 sold out in 3 minutes. A press release for the 1944 exhibition of Posada's work at the Art Institute of Chicago dubbed him the father of modern Mexican art, which is very ironic given that he was buried in a pauper's grave and was relatively unknown during his lifetime. It was the discovery of his prints in the 1920s by the Mexican muralists such as Diego Rivera that was critical in making Posada a widely recognized figure. So it seems fitting to conclude with this print. This first appeared in 1913, and you can see it's got 2 titles. It appeared in November 1913. Posada died in February 1913. So the first title, Gran Fandango y Francachela de Todas las Calaveras, which sounds so much more interesting in Spanish than it does in English, means happy dance and wild party of all the skeletons. And the second title was given to it in 1930, when the first posthumous edition of Posada's prints was published from the original plates. And this print was given a new title, which translates as The Folk Dance Beyond the Grave. But the last words go to Octavio Paz, the Mexican poet, diplomat, and Nobel Prize winner, who wrote, "The Mexican is familiar with death, jokes about it, caresses it, sleeps with it, celebrates it. It is one of his favorite toys and his most steadfast love." Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your support of Tepots Rosa. Thank you.